Hello, and welcome to Beyond, a podcast from the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. I'm your host, Eric Bond. In episode 2 of this podcast, we met Josephine Nabukenya in Kampala, Uganda. Josephine became an activist for children living with HIV when she was still a child herself. Around the same time, halfway around the world, another child was becoming the face of pediatric HIV in her country. Ashley Rose Murphy was born with HIV in Canada in 1998, and as a kid, she became one of the most prominent voices speaking out.
Together, we are sharing our experiences to help others and to reduce the stigma around HIV. Often we shrink away from having the difficult conversations.
While Josephine went on to found a nonprofit for children living with chronic disease, Ashley Rose ultimately burned out from the spotlight and the pressure of being a spokesperson for HIV. She decided to get a job working with students at a university in Toronto. Many of the kids she works with have no idea about her past as a national spokesperson, or that she's a medical miracle who was not expected to live this long.
I was 6 weeks old when I went into cardiac arrest.
On today's episode, the joys and burdens of being a childhood activist. Ashley Rose Murphy. Ordinary can be extraordinary. Stay with us. One April morning in 1998, Ashley Rose entered the world to rough circumstances.
I was born to a mother who was an addict and alcoholic, and although she loved me and everything, she had a hard time taking care of me.
When Ashley was a month old, a social worker did a surprise home inspection.
And they found that I was being malnourished because I wasn't being fed. I wasn't being breastfed. I wasn't really being bottle fed. There was no formula in any of the cupboards they found. My crib was being held together by duct tape.
Ashley weighed less than 4 pounds. Children's Aid placed Ashley in foster care. But 2 weeks later, Ashley went into cardiac arrest, and she was rushed to Sick Kids, a hospital in downtown Toronto.
They did an x-ray on me, found that all 4 lobes of my lungs were filled with PC pneumonia. So they brought in my mother for testing, did a blood test on both myself and my mother, and both came back full-blown AIDS. And at the time, they were like, well, we need to put her into a medically induced coma or else she will die. And then I stayed in that coma until 6 months.
Ashley couldn't breathe on her own. Along with keeping her body functioning, the doctors started giving her antiretroviral therapy to build her immune system. She was lucky. It was only 2 years previously that highly active antiretroviral therapy, or HAART, became widely available in Canada. While her body was taking this time out, Ashley's health improved somewhat. Her weight increased to 8 pounds, but the doctors wanted to move her out of the hospital. They were worried that with her compromised immune system, she would pick up one of the viruses floating around the hospital. They only expected her to live another month.
So Children's Aid started looking for a foster family that would take me, and a lot of people said no. The woman who had fostered me in the past for those couple weeks, she didn't know of my status. And when she heard about it, she wanted nothing to do with me.
Ashley's social worker hit the phones, and after more than 200 calls, she found a woman who said she would take Ashley right away. At that moment, Carrie and Don Murphy became Ashley's new mom and dad, even though Don didn't know it yet.
She hadn't even consulted him. It was 1998. It wasn't like she could just text him being like, hey, honey, I'm bringing a kid home.
So Don Murphy had a surprise when he came home from teaching that day.
And my dad basically was just like, Carrie, why? Why are you bringing a baby in who we're going to fall in love with, who is going to die? And my mom was just like, no one else wanted her, and I wanted her. And she said that the day that she walked into the house with me, she said that she felt this sense coming over her, the spirit, almost as if God was speaking to her, and just kind of gave her the nudge to be like, she's going to be all right. You guys are going to be fine. And my mom just took that feeling and she ran with it. And that is the reason why I'm here today.
Ashley was the 9th kid to join the Murphy family, which eventually grew to 10. As a couple, Carrie and Don had made a decision to provide a stable and loving home for children who might otherwise fall between the cracks. Most of Ashley's siblings are adopted or foster kids like herself, and most have some sort of health or mobility challenge.
A lot of us come from backgrounds where people didn't properly take care of us. This was the first time that we came to a home that genuinely loved us and genuinely cared.
Ashley was finally home with the Murphys, but she was not well. Her early years were a blur of doctor's visits and medications. At one point, in order to feed her and make sure that she was getting her medication, doctors had to put in a gastrointestinal tube.
I had a feeding tube put in my stomach when I was 5 because I weighed 23 pounds. And this G tube, I'd say, is probably the most painful thing that I've had to experience as a result of HIV. Like, I remember, like, screaming in pain because my mom didn't want to take me to the doctors once a month to take this tube out. Because, again, I lived an hour away from the hospital. So she would like lie me down on the kitchen counter and do the procedure. And it was like, hold on, honey, before you go to school, let's make sure you do it. And like already by the time I go to school, I'm like, I've already had an emotional day. And I mean, I've had the G tube out since I was 9, but there's still scar tissue there that hurts a lot in certain circumstances. But that was also something I was very insecure about. Like, not just because of the HIV, but like I'd always hide it, make sure like I was never wearing like short like tops or whatever, just because like didn't want any questions.
When she was 7, Ashley's parents sat her down and explained that one of the reasons that she took daily medication and was constantly going to see the doctor is that she is living with HIV.
And I mean, at the time beforehand, I thought every kid was going to the doctors every 3 months. And the moment when she told me, I didn't really process it. If anything, I said, "What's for dinner?" It completely went over my head. I didn't really take into like what the gravity of the situation really was until my parents were like, "But you can't tell anybody." And I kind of took a step back and I was like, "But why? That's so weird of you, considering my entire life, all these 7 years, the long time I'd been on Earth, they told me to never tell a lie. And they told me to always be truthful to who I am." And I felt like that was the exact opposite of what they had always told me.
Eventually it sunk in, and Ashley understood that HIV can be a deadly virus.
And I was like, why me? Why did I have HIV? Why did God do this? Why did my mom do this? And like, why did my birth mom do this?
Ashley had so many questions.
These questions would be like, do you think I'd be able to grow up and have kids? Do you think I can grow up and go to university? And like, these are things that most kids that like, they know what's going to happen. It's set in stone. And for me, I feel like I knew it was going to happen, but I was also scared because I would like the fear of the unknown. I didn't know that I'd even live to see these days. My mom, she would always be like, yes, you are going to make it. You are going to have kids. You are going to be in university. You're going to graduate, like all of these things. Like, she was always my biggest advocate, and I think that's why I learned how to advocate for myself. Because when you have people in your corner, it's so much easier to be your most authentic self. She never liked seeing people throw a pity party for themselves in that sense, because she knew it wasn't going to do me any good. And so I remember her sitting me down and being like, Ashley, when people don't get the help they need, they dig a hole that's so deep for themselves that they can't get out. And that's exactly what happened to my birth mother and her succumbing to her addictions, unfortunately.
And Ashley's family helped put her own situation in perspective. One brother is legally blind and is a quadriplegic. Doctors had predicted that he would never talk.
But he is the funniest and the smartest guy I know and has defied every odd in the book. And to me, he's one of my biggest inspirations because I'm like, if Patrick can do it, so can I.
Although Ashley's parents had cautioned her against sharing her HIV status with others, it really wasn't in her nature not to be open about herself.
So after I found out about my diagnosis, I just kind of started telling everybody as if it wasn't like this huge, big secret. And that's when I started to learn about stigma.
At that age, the kids were generally accepting. Ashley recalls telling one boy that she's living with HIV, and he replied matter-of-factly that he's lactose intolerant. Parents were another matter. One group of parents wanted her kicked out of the school. Fortunately, the principal told those parents that they were free to take their own kids out of the school. Basic experiences like going over to the houses of her friends sometimes sent Ashley the message that she was unsafe to be around.
Growing up, I would go to houses and they'd give me like plastic plates and cups and utensils and then like throw them out after I was done. Or sleepovers were really tough. The second that one of the parents caught wind about my status, they're like, should I be allowing my daughter to also be going to this sleepover? It's like, we were 8, 9.
Even Ashley's teachers sometimes had fear around HIV and misconceptions, like her guitar instructor who asked if he could get HIV from sharing the instrument with her.
Can you get HIV from like putting your fingers on like the fretboards and like, is there any like transfer? Like, no.
One day, Ashley cut a finger on a guitar string and her teacher freaked out and reported it to the Ministry of Health without first checking in with Ashley or her parents. At that time, Ashley's viral load was undetectable, meaning that she literally could not transmit HIV to another person. Ashley credits her mother with giving her the confidence to ignore the stigma.
My mom never like took me away from these things because I know a lot of youth who have HIV whose parents sheltered them because of their own self-stigmatization of what they thought HIV was. And that is really dangerous. I know peers that didn't know their status until they were 14. They were born with it. And that is an age that it becomes very scary because that's when, you're in high school, you're starting to experiment, you're starting to figure out who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And if you don't know that vital part of who you are, that could be unsafe, not just for others, but for you. And I think knowing my status from a very young age, as hard as it was, I think it was beneficial for me because now I've had like 20 years basically under my belt of like trying to figure out what this is and what it means to me and like kind of where my purpose is in life.
Like Josephine, the support that Ashley got from her family was augmented by the support that she got from her peers. She belonged to a support group for children living with HIV, and every year she had a camp experience with children affected by HIV.
I found my forever family. I found my support system. In a moment of stress, the HIV community has always been a community I can fall back on because they come from a certain place of understanding and they know what it's like.
Also like Josephine, Ashley was asked to step forward and speak about her experience living with HIV.
When I was 10, that's when my doctors and nurses first started being like, hey, we want to do this panel. Do you want to speak on it? The older kids in the clinic wanted to do it. And I was like, that's what the cool kids are doing. Like, I want to be like everybody else. It's a very like monkey see, monkey do type thing. You just want to feel involved and a part of something. And so I did this initial panel, and I really enjoyed it, surprisingly.
Ashley began speaking on panels to doctors and to other groups, but as time went on, she noticed that other kids were becoming more reluctant to talk about their HIV status publicly.
Like, I know people personally that they stopped speaking at a certain age when they got older because they were like, if I continue speaking, I will not get a job. Because it's the digital footprint. It never leaves. And people were really fearful of that. But for me, I don't exactly know why I was always okay with it. I guess part of me being like the performative person I am, like I feel the most comfortable on a stage.
Eventually, Ashley was approached by CANFAR, the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research, and she was asked to become a spokesperson across the entire nation. She spoke at events and she did media interviews talking about her experience growing up with HIV. Sometimes interviewers seemed to forget that they were talking to a child and asked awkward or inappropriate questions. For instance, when she was 12, Ashley was asked in an interview if she would go back in time and change her HIV status if she could.
Like, that's a pretty loaded question for a 12-year-old. And without even a second thought, I said no. I was like, of course, like, my life would be so much different had I not had HIV. I would not have the opportunities I have. I would not have the family I have. I wouldn't have the education I have.
While Ashley was a spokesperson all across Canada, At school, she was still a teenage girl who loved listening to Oasis and Bon Jovi, bands that she had learned were favorites of her birth parents, and she loved singing and dancing in theater. She had dreams beyond educating Canada about HIV.
10, 12 years ago, if you asked me what my dream job would have been, it would have been to star on a Broadway musical in New York. Like, I had the sights set for the bright lights, the big city type thing that a lot of people do, especially being from Canada. It's like,
While Ashley was open about her HIV status in elementary school and was comfortable speaking on the stage all across Canada, she became self-conscious about her status when she walked through the doors of high school.
I definitely realized when I went into grade 9, I was like, you know what, maybe I won't tell everybody. Just because I was fearful of like that rejection, not even just like romantically, but just friendships, worried people weren't going to be my friends because as soon as they find out I have HIV, they go like, okay, bye. I had drama club every single week. And there's after one practice, randomly, I was chatting with a couple of my friends. And this one girl came up to me in front of everybody. But she just like randomly was just like, I heard that you have HIV. Do you? And I was so taken aback because I'd never just been asked so like unprompted, just so out of the blue. Like I said, no, I don't have it. And I walked away crying.
Ashley went home and told her mother, who consoled her, but also told her to go back the next day and tell the other girl the truth.
So I listened to my mom and I went up to her privately and I told her, kind of lay it all out there and then say, do you have any questions? And when I told her, she profusely apologized. And she like openly apologized to me in front of like a bunch of kids. It made me feel good knowing that she felt bad, but my mom's approach was always kill them with kindness. And then from that moment on, I have never said no.
And then there's the role that stigma plays on teenage romance.
One relationship that I had in grade 9, I thought it ended just because, you know, you're 13 years old, 14 years old. Like these relationships, they come and they go. But then I ended up hearing months later that the boy's parents told him to break up with me because of my HIV. That definitely tampers with your self-esteem, especially when you're like a 14-year-old girl who's going through puberty and like there's already so many things that you're worried about, and adding that onto it definitely did not make it easier at all. Like I did have a moment in high school where I was with this boy for not a very long time. I was like 16, 17. And there's at one point he became sick. But I just remember when he was like telling me that he wasn't feeling well, he like made a joke being like, I wonder if it's the HIV. And I was like, that is so wrong and messed up. And I was like, if you think that you can get HIV by being kissed, I'm like, I don't even want to be around someone that ignorant. I was like, they are not worth my time. But I think that made it a little bit difficult for me in terms of my advocacy journey because I was speaking very openly in high school, but I wasn't super open about it per se up until like grade 10 or 11 when I started doing the speaking tour. And then I did my first TEDx talk.
Ashley's school system wanted to host a TEDx talk, and they asked her father, who was a teacher, if Ashley would be willing. Although she had spoken all across Canada, this was something different.
And it was in my community. That absolutely terrified me. I don't think I've ever been more nervous for a speech. And I was worried, well, if I tell hundreds of my high school peers, what's going to happen when I go back to school? Like, will they accept me? Will they treat me any differently?
Ashley faced her fear. She titled her talk, How to Be Extraordinary.
Find your voice. Don't be ashamed of what makes you unique. That's what makes you interesting. Rock your differences.
And I was super nervous for no reason, I guess, because the second I finished, it was my school, like my peers, that gave me a standing ovation. And I was like, all of that worry for nothing. But again, it's like going back to that self-stigmatization. It's like we always think it's like the end of the world, like that someone's not going to accept us for who we are. When I was 16, I did a speaking tour and I got to take my mom all across Canada and the United States talking, and getting to share that like experience with her was super beautiful and amazing.
But there was a trade-off to being on the road.
I miss most of my grade 11 year. I miss most of my grade 12 year. The traveling, speaking. And those are the years that, you know, you go out and party, you meet friends, and and all of that. And I really wasn't participating in a lot of that. It'd be like one day I'd be in somewhere in Canada, and I'd spend one night like pounding out like a 9-page essay, and then the next day I'd hop on stage and chat to 20,000 people. So that was my norm for a while. But then I'd go home and yeah, I'd have friends being like, hey, how was it? Or like, I saw clips, you were amazing. Like I really had people rallying behind me, and that gave me the confidence to keep going. Because I really was fearful when I started speaking for the large crowds. I had to sit down with my parents and kind of have like a game plan of like, if this doesn't go well, you might need to move schools.
Over time, being on stage night after night, Ashley began to feel less connected to her own story.
There was at one point, I was speaking so much, I genuinely felt like a robot because I kept saying the same things over and over and over again. And yes, it's my story. Who knows my story better than I do? But I was getting bored. I was like, I cannot be delivering the same 40-minute speech every single time. I definitely got a little burnt out from doing so many speeches. As much as I enjoyed it, it was just like, I was almost craving to do something else. And sometimes now I'm on the flip side of, is that really what I wanted?
Constantly educating people can be exhausting.
I've had to educate at the weirdest times, at a grocery store, at 2 a.m. in a hotel, like the most random circumstances that you can think of. I have educated someone over social media, in person. That's why it feels like advocacy may not be my full-time job, but it feels like my full-time job because I can turn it on at any moment. And that it comes with this, like, obviously perks because I love what I do, but sometimes, and I love my friends, but sometimes they say a little bit too much. They'll be like, oh, my friend has a TED Talk. But then those conversations open the floodgates of like, why do you have a TED Talk? Why this? Why that? And then it feels like I'm constantly having to share my story. And to me, like, that doesn't feel super exploitive, but at the same time, it's like, I was just looking to have a night out, and now I'm educating somebody. And I just roll my eyes and I'm like, oh God, here we go again. Because like, I feel like the disclosing never stops.
After Ashley graduated from high school, she cut back on her advocacy work. As her mother had promised back when Ashley was 7, she did go to university, studying theater at York in Toronto. After she got her degree, Ashley still dreamed of Broadway, but she also needed a job. Ashley decided to strike out and find a new community, and she was happy to find a good fit supporting a Jewish student organization back at her alma mater. As the assistant director, she manages the social media and plans events for the students.
Yeah, in my like HIV work, I'm so used to being on camera that sometimes it's kind of nice, like being able to step away and getting students to do it.
I found another thing to be passionate about because I thought it was only going to be HIV, which is not a problem. But, you know, I think it's important to expand my horizons to learn more. Like, if I want people to learn about HIV, then I got to learn about other things. I got to be educated about other things too, and wanting to have those conversations.
Ashley has been in a committed relationship for 5 years now, and she looks forward to marriage and motherhood. She says that her boyfriend stood out because he did not hesitate when he learned about her HIV status.
He found out about my status the day I met him, but then from then on, because he took an interest in me, he also took an interest in learning about HIV. And that's not something someone had done for me in the past. And so that's how I knew it was different, because he was willing to do the research that not a lot of people would.
Do you miss the life that you had when you were Canada's spokesperson for HIV?
That's a good question. I don't know if I particularly miss it. I just feel like there are stages that I've gone through recently, particularly as I've, gone into the workforce, like started that 9 to 5 after university type thing. It's definitely made me realize like what I prioritize and that my priorities are different. Because growing up, I think the reason I experienced a little bit of burnout is because I never said no. I didn't even know how to say the word no up until I was 23 years old, like genuinely. And it was just because I gave and gave and gave, and I didn't mind. I genuinely didn't. But there came a point in time where I was just like, I'm a little burnt out. I can't say yes to everybody as much as I'd love to. I'm only one person, and I have a social life, and I have now I have a 9 to 5, and there's just not enough room in my schedule, unfortunately. Like if I had all the time in the world, like, yes, I have the same amount of hours in the day as Beyonce, but I am not Beyonce. I am Ashley Rose Murphy. I'm a completely different person with different priorities and a family that I love to see. Because sometimes people just pigeonhole me as a speaker. And I'm like, but there's so many other things that I bring. Like, yes, I am a speaker. Yes, this is why I'm here. But I'm a sister. I'm a daughter. I'm a significant other. I have nieces. I love to sing. I love to act. Like, there are so many facets of me. And that's why I say if one person can't accept the fact that I have HIV, they don't deserve to know the other facets of me and like what makes Ashley Rose Murphy, Ashley Rose Murphy.
From her more balanced place, Ashley does still educate about HIV, both at events and one-on-one, and she does still very much consider herself an HIV advocate and activist. She recognizes that the HIV epidemic is in a different place than it was when she was 10. ARVs have stabilized the transmission of HIV in Canada, and yet more than 60,000 Canadians are living with HIV today, and 1,500 Canadians continue to acquire it each year. So the need for HIV education remains.
You have a conversation with someone and they think it's either deadly or non-existent anymore. It's like complete opposite ends of the spectrum. And it's like, well, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and we need to debunk those myths.
And while Ashley is alive today because of the ARVs she began taking at 6 weeks of age, she thinks about what it means to be aging on that medication.
My generation will be one of the first generations that were born with HIV that got to see through to like the end of their lifespan, like who knows, 60s, 70s.
Back when Ashley was 9, she had a mentor who died from liver failure because of the toll of ARVs on his body.
And he was only in his 50s, and that really set me back. Because that was like one of the first times genuinely that I remember losing somebody from HIV and being scared.
Ashley has already seen the effects of long-term exposure to ARVs on her own body.
Like, I was 16 years old being diagnosed with osteoporosis. That is something for people 50 plus. Like, that should not have occurred, but it was because of the medication I took. It thinned my bones. It made them very brittle. But I also try not to stress about it because I'm like, you know what? If I can live to 70, like, God bless. Like, every day is a blessing. Every year is a blessing.
Do you see a world beyond HIV?
I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher, but I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of faith that there will be a cure within my lifetime. And if there isn't, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I guess like look beyond to the future and look towards like the impact that I can make as an advocate, but also in my day-to-day life, because it's the day-to-day life interactions that you have with people that mean the most. And I think because of how much I've lost in my life and how much I've come close to dying myself, I don't take a single second for granted. So I'm just thankful that I'm at a place in my life and my friends are at a place in their lives where we're all starting to, get married and have children, and all of the children that are being born are HIV negative. Like, I keep in touch with this one girl who lives in the States. She talks openly about her story, and she just recently had a baby boy, and she's documenting her experiences as an HIV positive mother with an HIV negative baby. And it's really cool to see this, and it feels like we're really the champions behind this new movement of children being born with HIV and being able to come out from it, still HIV positive, but giving birth to a whole generation of HIV negative children. My greatest goal in life is to be a mother. And if I can give birth to HIV negative children, I'll know that I've made it. I wish I could tell my birth mom and be like, you know what, we made it.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Beyond, a podcast from the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Find out more about Ashley Rose Murphy at petaids.org. And make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app to never miss an episode. Many thanks to associate producer Madeline Morris. We had editing help from Dan Bobkoff at Rhyme Media. I'm Eric Bond. Join me next week for a conversation with Amish Ondiek, a young pharmacist living in Nairobi, Kenya.
I found myself on my mom's grave. So I just went there and prayed and asked her to be lenient.